Southern Soul Livestream is a weekly talk show and music hangout where the hosts learn your name and just might remind you of a favorite relative. We spotlight fascinating people, discuss current events, and pay special attention to lifting up generations. So if you want to know more, learn more, be more, or just be, Southern Soul Livestream is the place for you. Join us every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Just log on, kick back, and experience the eclectic vibe. Check us out at soullivestream.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie, for getting us started with a nice icebreaker and history lesson. I feel I am now ready. You know, as I was thinking tonight, I was thinking, how in the world can we recognize, honor, and sit down and talk with someone who is so highly decorated and recognized? And, I said, you know what? All you can say is thank you. Thank you for Mrs. Bunny Bracey-Sutton for being here tonight to share with us her story and experiences. But let me give you a background on her. Originally native of Dinwiddie, Virginia, she was inspired by her town to look more than her town had to offer. However, within 3 years of teaching within the United States, she recognized there was a lack of support in education. So she decided to move to Germany. Mrs. Bracey-Sutton is a pioneer in the use of technology in schools in the United States, where she started her career overseas, working in the Department of Defense K through 12 schools. It was there she developed unusual skills in creativity in the classroom, in addition to multiculturalism, that inspired her approach to teaching and connecting with children. While stationed there, she was assigned 37 third graders. Since then, she's received tons of awards. She's currently a member recognized in the Alexandra African-American Hall of Fame. She was appointed by President Bill Clinton, was the only K through 12 teacher appointed to his National Information Infrastructure and Advisory Council. And she also got a chance to hang out with George Lucas and was appointed to committees by him. So many experience, so much awesomeness we will share with you tonight. But before we do, Tamika, do you mind spotlighting Miss Bonnie Bracey-Sutton? Awesome. Good evening. How are you? I think you're on mute. Tamika, can you send her to unmute, please? There
Got it.
Awesome. Okay.
Sorry, I didn't see it. I'm looking at two screens. Well, actually, my mother got me started because she came from a peanut farm, went to Virginia State, HBCU, but it was only a 2-year program at the time. And she was disgusted by what she didn't know that other people did who had been to a 4-year college. So she went back to school. So once I I could read when I was 2 years old. So she pushed me into helping other people. But when I got to teach, I found that there was a big division in what people wanted you to teach, depending on who the students were. And I was actually bored, like the kids were in school, because some people taught reading and math and English all day, and spelling. They didn't teach any science, they didn't teach any geography. The kids didn't move unless it was PE, and they would hop out of their seats when it was PE time, like they were getting out of prison, and that made me feel bad. But in Germany, since there were no materials and there was no money and there was nobody to always be looking down your nose and looking in your classroom, you could do whatever you wanted to, as long as you didn't get in trouble with the MPs. The MPs would send the whole school home when things happened. Like when kids got upset, they would put toilet paper in the commodes. And when you have that many children who are international, you have to be international. So you have to learn to read faces, understand languages, be able to group people, be able to lead kids, be inventive and help them explore, be engaged and interested in what they were doing. So they didn't want to leave school. And that's what I did. But you had to work with nothing because they didn't give us any materials. So I worked the Red Cross. I talked to the soldiers. There were so many men on that post that it smelled like men. And you go like, what does that smell like? I can't explain it to you. But you could go in the library and say, I have 37 children in the class and I need whatever. And they would get it because they would just want to come see kids for a little while. And it's a place that's of interest now because it's where a lot of the Afghans are being brought in near Landstuhl and all of those places. Also, it's the place where there were bunkers from the war and caves and memorials. And the kids had nothing. So we learned to draw, we learned to sing, we learned to do theater. And I learned my German colors by there's some little jelly belly candies. You use whatever you could to teach. So it made me inventive, I guess. Didn't have all those books to, I never saw my principal. In fact, I can't tell you what we said about him. Just, you backed out of his room, okay? You didn't go in there for anything unless you had to. He's worked really hard. And the hardest thing was to take the kids to the officers club for lunch. That was the hardest thing because it snowed almost every day.
Well,
So interesting times.
Well, one thing I love about your story is I begin to, really pull out the pieces and begin to see how you started. Who would think that start there would prepare you for so much, let's say, adversity, yet celebration? So tell us, once you leave Germany and decide to come back to the States, what did you see and what did you begin to see here locally?
Well, I tried to teach in DC schools and I was really good in Germany, but in DC schools, they kept telling me what to do, how to do it, when I should do it. And there were only 11 books in the school and there were more. And this was Anthony Bowen down in Washington, DC, which is now a police station, okay? And so I wrote to the president and I said, this doesn't work. They send us a box of books a month. I said, I have children who can read the whole set of books in a week or more. So something has to be done. And it was a Republican and his wife, you know who this was, right? She started doing books for kids. And in this classroom that I was in DC, you could see the White House through the panes where there wasn't cardboard, but there weren't many of them. And there were, I'm saying to myself, I'm teaching in DC and the schools for kids in Germany are better. How is that? But I did it for 3 years until the kids started following me around. When I went to the grocery store, they would follow me. They would ask me, could I take them to the museum? They wore me out. The other thing was sometimes children fell down the shaft of the buildings that they were in because there wasn't a way to close the elevator doors. And it just got very sad. A lot of things happened. So then I moved to Arlington schools. Arlington was in a community called Halls Hill. And the people in Halls Hill were so wonderful to me. It was a Black community. It was gated.
Okay.
And the trash man would bring me rugs. They bring me chairs, they bring me magazines. The mothers would cook and bring things to me. It was sort of like the community embraced their kids because they wanted better for them.
And this was
And
before schools were desegregated, right?
absolutely.
Okay.
And the sad thing was there was an oil can outside my classroom. In the wintertime, the men who needed days work were standing around the oil can to warm their hands. And I didn't have to talk about what happens when you don't learn to read and write because that example was there. But those men were also helpful too. They would bring things back from where they worked. They planted flowers under my window. You can't imagine how people who had nothing did so much to help me. And I did have some materials. I wasn't using museums at the time because I didn't know how. And then I learned that if you have Black supervisors and you tell them what you need, they find a way to help you get it. And so there was Floyd Gravitt, and he was from South Boston, Virginia. He had grown up very poor, and he was determined that sixth graders would go to New York to see a play, and that to do that, somebody had to help him with theater. So that's how I got started in theater. And
awesome.
Theater was before technology.
Before technology, there was theater. Now, tell me this. One thing I love is that you're over in Germany, you had this community, you come over back in the States, you begin to build a community of your own.
Yes.
And it seems like there was this opportunity where you weren't just a teacher by yourself, you were surrounded by everybody. Like you said, it was the garbage man. It was, the various people in the community that would support you to make sure that the kids had resources.
Oh, it was even better than that. There were some kids that didn't have facilities for showers in their home. So there was a parent who would come in and supervise people getting showers. And my father put water pipes in some people's houses so they could have running water. It was just a community effort to change things. And of course, my mother was very happy about that. So she made dresses for the little girls who didn't have anything much. We had love, but we didn't have much of anything else. And Sean Sidnor put a picture of his grandmother in the newspaper and online today. We didn't go to the library because I didn't even know where the library, if there was a library in that section of town. I don't think there was.
Thank you. So tell me this. Show us how you became associated with Star Wars and the Indiana Jones franchise. Like, what were you doing? How did that happen? How did you go from where you were to get involved with those guys?
Well, I got invited to integrate schools. So I moved to a school where it was mostly white kids, but I never learned physics and deep science about space that much at HBCUs because the main job we had was to teach people to read, to bring people up to speed. So when they went out to teach, they had basic skills. So I was fascinated by NASA and National Geographic and groups that did things for teachers and let you participate. And NASA had all kinds of things. And so one of their projects was to have you build your classroom like the inside of a space room. And so I had drawings and pictures and all those types of things. And some men came by and looked in, and then they brought some other men. I didn't know who they were. And the next day, my principal said, you need to take that stuff down. It's been up for 2 weeks now. And just as I was getting ready to take it down, I got a letter, which I shared with you, from George Lucas, who wanted me to help him create videos to teach people how to share new ideas and ways of teaching. He didn't like school at all. He wanted to be a race car driver, but he had an accident, so he didn't do that. And he's also diabetic. And I took a lot of interest in health because in the summertime, I always worked in a doctor's office. So I was doing those kind of things, and the men saw that. And see, I don't even know if he was one of the men or not, because I didn't know who George Lucas was. So when I got this letter and I opened it and it said George Lucas, the boy said, George Lucas, the kids almost fell on the floor. And they said, you got a letter from George Lucas? I said, yeah. And so then I found out who George Lucas was, and I was astonished. But NASA, when these guys went up to space and showed off all the money they had and showed us how they could go to space, NASA didn't do that. When NASA did it, they carried us with them. We studied, we knew what the mission was going to be. We even raised tilapia, that's fish, in a tank. We grew plants. We were supposed to be able to take space rocks to the classroom, but my principal didn't want the responsibility. So I went to the museum. And then I found out, you know what? I didn't have to buy stuff, because if I connected to the museum, I could use their stuff. So I learned to use museums as a learning place way before anybody else started talking about museum education. And the bus drivers, of course, they liked that because they could go into DC for a little while, and they would sometimes join me. And then I got really smart. I said, you know what? Instead of them prattling off as docents and telling us about the exhibit, I'll get the material for the kids, teach them that, and then they can ask their own questions. Mm. So,
well, you know, I love that story.
I can't explain to you how George Lucas changed my life. I have had an experience most people will never have. He has this long table at his ranch, and he would invite in all the people who were in education to have them pitch their ideas. And they didn't always agree. And I'd be sitting there, they didn't know who I was. And Shirley Malcolm, she's another Black educator in science, was sitting there, and there were several of us. And they would pitch their ideas, and then they had to leave. And then we would talk about what they talked about, whether we liked it, whether it would work or not.
Well, you know, I tell you what I love about that story is that your principal is not supportive, but all of a sudden George Lucas is supportive. But at the same time, that theme seems like it follows you throughout your career. Do you mind telling us about the young man who brought a computer to your classroom?
Well, I'm a pretty peaceful teacher. So a young man was brought to me, and they said, you know, he's going in special ed, but you'll get along with him because you get along with all kids. And this kid looked at me and said, you're drinking coffee out of a styrofoam cup. That's not right. And I said, what? He said, see, there were kids interested in environmental things a long time ago. And I said, this kid is going to special ed. And so I remember, okay, so I had another trick. I read that if you taught special ed and if you taught gifted and talented, you could pretty much make your own program. And so I decided to take gifted and talented. Now, that's not meaning that I never had any kids who were special ed, because a lot of special ed kids are gifted and talented. They just can't sit still all day, okay? They can't take it. It's like, I don't want to do this. So they act out or they do stuff, or anyway, this young man could think really fast, but he couldn't squeeze his ideas out of his head onto a pencil. He didn't test well. And he was angry because he was frustrated. And so I worked with him a little bit, and I realized that I could help him not be in special ed. I don't want to use his name because I don't know whether he'd be listening or not. But anyway, I sent him to George Washington University and had him tested. And he tested 20 points above what Arlington had, which meant that he could stay in my classroom. And well, nobody else wanted it, okay? And we didn't fight but he still couldn't write. And people gave him a hard time. The kids teased him, and he just had a hard time. So his father said, if I let him use a computer, would that bother you? Can you bring it to the classroom? Now, like most teachers, I didn't know that much about technology, but I said, sure, bring it. And it changed my life. So the first way it changed my life was when I was doing projects like plays and stuff like that. He would type all the stuff out and give it to me. He'd say, well, I know you know who the people are on the play, so I made the brochure for you. And I looked at this, and he could change the font, and he could find things. And so this parent and I started learning to use the computer. And he wrote an essay for Prodigy. And I got a ticket because I went at lunchtime to the post office to make sure it got there on time. But it was okay because he won, and we went to a ceremony where they gave him the choice of going to Disneyland or accepting a computer for me and him. And you know who did that?
Wow.
So I got a free computer. Well, if you get a free computer and the kid can do it, you have to be able to do it too. And then you think about it, you say, well, there's 2 computers in the classroom. What are you going to do? So I ended up being able to get people to help me. Well, see, I had a Corvette at the time, and that was my technology. It was this cool car with the lights and the stuff. But, I had to ramp down. I bought another computer. So I had 3 computers. And there was a book called The One Computer Classroom. Well, I had 3. If you think I had trouble in school with kids, nope. Mm-mm-mm. And then National Geographic had a project, and they needed some people, and so then I had 4 computers. Now, I had maybe 22 kids or 20. And when it was time for PE, they didn't want to go. When it was time to go to after school, they would sneak out of after school and crawl down the hall and come back to the computers. So that made those people feel uncomfortable. And the principal got on my case. So, do you really think that people are going to use computers? But there was a guy named Chris Deedy who taught me about community use of computers. And when I took that course, I got another computer. So I ended up with about 8 computers. That made me I was like, everybody wanted to be in my class. So you can see why principals would be a little bit upset. But the other thing was, I learned that the kids who memorize stuff and blurt it out are not the smartest kids in your class. I learned to pay attention to the ones that didn't say very much. I learned that with the games, even though the games were stupid, some of them, I learned that those kids who kept trying at a game, who would persevere, who would just keep getting it until they understood it, that those were the kids who were the real learners. And I also learned that I had some things to learn. I had to learn to move away from the front of the class because my kids would put their fingers up and say, you know what, that's the second time you said that.
Oh.
I can find that on the computer. And I should have gotten upset. But then I thought about it. I said, well, if they remember it to know that I said it, then I did a good job the first time. So it's okay for them to tell me that.
They were definitely.
They wouldn't go home. It would be 3:30, 4 o'clock or whatever the time was in that school. And they would say, can we stay? And so I'd say, well, I have to correct your papers. And so one kid said to me, well, why do you have to correct papers? Why don't you just put it on the computer and we'll do it on the computer? Which was a very, very smart thing. And it really worked because I could print it off. The only problem was the kids got so good at it, people thought that they were cheating on tests, and they wouldn't let me proctor a test, and they wouldn't let me give a test. So it was so funny. The kids got so mad when they found that out. They tested 11th grade, and these were 4th graders, 11th grade in math. Now they did have some mistakes, the basic math, they only did 8th grade, but the geometry and the trigonometry, they learned that. They learned that on the computer. And I didn't even direct them to that.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I learned.
You know what I love about this part of your story is that you discovered much, much earlier than any teacher, any professor, any research person that kids love technology and computers. Kids learn very differently. And I connect that to your creativity experience in Germany. And as you begin to come over here and you're like, hey, you got to figure out what motivates and inspires these kids. So they begin to learn in your classroom differently, so much so that you're getting this negative attention, but you can see that the kids are learning. And it just sounds such like an awesome experience. I want to pivot to this next thing, right? The before and after, desegregation. Some will say we lost permission to be creative once schools integrated. Once the, schools started, getting stressed and they would do, I guess this is your term, where, they now are vendorized. They're now responding to these external pressures. What are your thoughts about that?
Okay, that didn't happen all at once. That happened in some schools. The vendorization has two parts. One is when they started making it a mandate, every kid had to pass certain tests at certain times. And they're not cookies. Even cookies, when you put them in the oven, don't all brown the same way. But the different groups, geography, math, they all started saying they have to know this much. Well, the math I got because there was a Black supervisor who said, you're going to be the math person. I said, I'm not the person. I don't really like this math. It's mindless. They have to do 200 somethings. They get bored doing it and I get bored correcting it. They said, no, you can teach it any way you want. And they had this thing called Cuisenaires, and it's visual math. You put the blocks together and it's 8 or it's 10 or it's 20. And then there's another kind called tessellations. And then on the programs for math, there was geometry. So that part, the vendorization didn't make any difference because they aced those tests. But there were some things they couldn't vendorize because the kids didn't care about it. And that was stuff like what's in the Dewey Decimal System. So I had to figure out a way to teach that. But because that was the thing they always got wrong. They didn't know what was in the 900s, what was in the 800s. And a librarian helped me with that. Instead of reading out of those basal textbooks where you spit back what's in the book. I hate to say this, but I didn't use the basal book. I used the library. We worked our way through the Dewey Decimal System. In 100s, you had to find a book you like, tell me about it. And then they did individualized reading if I could. In every school, I couldn't do that because all schools didn't have the same librarians, but I had a couple of librarians, especially a lady named Adela Inorino, who understood what I was trying to do. And so we led the kids through what the different things. We also taught them poetry. We also started going to places where, like the Smithsonian, see, people don't realize you're buying all this stuff for your classmates to drive my car up to the school store and spend like $400. You know what? I used to spend $5 and go to the Smithsonian and they'd give me stuff to teach with, or I'd get in the bus and they would allow us to use things and bring it back to the classroom. In fact, I got to go to India through the Smithsonian and build a chest for other people to use as the artifacts in it to learn about India. So the vendorization, that's going on now. Okay, so I won 4 different prizes at NASA. And I hate to share this, but so I work for a group called Mad Science. And I tell you, I cried when I looked at the materials that they had. You could just go back there and get anything you needed for your lesson, but they only paid you $15. And then they gave you a script. You didn't have to know anything. You had to follow that script. If you went off script, you get in trouble. And I got in trouble because I knew more than was on the script. And that happens with vendorization in almost every area, like maps and any of those things. If you're kind of smart and you know stuff, you don't memorize it to prattle it back. You just keep exploring, and you're not allowed to do that. It's vendorization means something like the program called My Big Brain. Why would they name it like that? I have no idea. But anyway, the people who write the programs decide what the kids learn. And when I tried to work in Washington again, because I live in Washington, and there's a lady that I work with who was at the State Department and who was at the Department of Education, Janelle Leonard. She's a fantastic woman. So we went here, and there are 8 areas where kids live in housing projects. And we went to their schools, and the principal told us, we don't do after school. We don't care whether the kids do computers. They have to pass this test. And after school, we're going to give them pizza, and they can do judo. There won't be any gym, yes. There won't be any NASA. We don't want to work our teachers too hard. We just want them to learn what they're going to do on the test. If it's not on the test, we don't care about it. And they didn't say that exactly, but they did exactly say that, if you understand what I mean. And a lot of schools are like that. And in fact, I got put out of a school happily at once I got put out. But I got put out of a school because there was a supervisor who you had to be on this page on a certain time in the book because the tests were coming up and she wanted to make sure that you cover stuff. Excuse me? She hated me, but she was kind to me. And if you looked at it, you would think, oh, she really loved it. So one day I said, you know what? Why don't you show me how to do that? And one kid had to go help with the PE, and one kid had to go to music, and another kid had to go to testify about something. She said, where are they going? I said, oh, that's just regular. She said, but how am I supposed to teach it if they're not here? I said, you were going to show me. So she said, well, I'll come back again. So she came back again. And this time they were going to chorus, 4 of them, and 3 of them were helping with the kindergarten. And she just threw her hands up, but she didn't really like it. But she did understand a little bit. See, because schools are community organizations, and you have to serve the community too. Mm-hmm. So you have to fix it. So whatever it is that you're doing for the community doesn't interfere with the teaching. But you can't glue a teacher to a schedule, but many schools do.
Well,
and many principals do.
Thanks for giving me that, because that kind of gives me the backdrop. And Katie, we got 2 more questions before we do open discussion. But I kind of want to, get us to current date, right? Mm-hmm. I often hear it's important that, parents, kind of understand, what teachers are going through, right? There are only so many hours in a day. You can't get everything done at home. You can't get everything done in the school. I mean, what are your thoughts on how parents can be more supportive in, what teachers are experiencing? How could parents, be more involved?
Well, right now with the pandemic and COVID, sadly, most teachers are doing a kind of teaching that they don't understand and they don't know how to do. So parental support is really important. But the problem is we have the digital divide. We don't have digital inclusion. Many of our parents have never had the subject matter that the kids are getting. So they get frustrated. So it doesn't work really well. But there are some people who, Dr. Clark from George Mason University wrote a paper that showed us how to help kids. So sometimes what you do is you involve the parents in what the kids are doing by example. You may even have them come in or send something home that helps them. But look, it even got me. I took 30 hours of Black history. My husband walked me through the museum. I got to a place where they started talking about all the revolts and the riots, and my knees got weak because I had never seen that stuff. See, school boards, oh, I would love to be able to go to a school board meeting there. School boards choose what you teach, and states decide whether or not you get to teach stuff. So parents have to be involved and learn what it is that they're teaching. That's why we have this whole big thing about critical race. It's just not there. This has been the worst year of my life about learning about Black history. I didn't know a lot of this stuff. And in fact, let me go back to the games. I used to teach Oregon Trail. Nobody told me that those people going to Oregon were going there so they could be white. They didn't want to be mixed. They didn't tell me that the people gave their smallpox infested clothes to the Native Americans so they could die. So there's some things, I mean, there's a way we can teach it, but we have to also do something with the parents because the parents don't have it. Some of us as teachers don't know it. I learned it through National Geographic, through George Lucas, through National Council of Social Studies, through the English, the groups that help teachers do a wonderful job in helping you to learn things that kids should know. But there are some people that just have these 5 things they want you to do, and they want parents to learn. And if the parents don't know it, I don't know what you do. And a lot of them don't. And the only thing you can do is try to be inclusive in your teaching so that whatever they do, the parents have at least some background. And so I had a principal named Cammy Murphy, Cat Calloway's daughter. There were more parents in the school than any school I've ever been in. I never listened for her footfall or parents because the parents came in and helped. And they were Black parents, they were Hispanic parents. In fact, we fed them to have them come in. And then the high school and the junior high school teachers would come and do workshops with us, with the kids. We even did things like a pajama party where kids would come, their parents would bring them in pajamas, and we would read stories to them to model to them how to read to your child. And the people at the junior high schools would explain the things that people need to think about when the children were going through that transitional, 6th grade thing. But that was Cammy Calloway Murphy. And I never had another principal like that. A lot of principals, to them, the school is their reputation, and their reputation rests on those test scores. And they don't understand why the kids don't learn, because they don't understand diverse cultures.
Yeah, I love your response for how parents can be, it seems, engaged and involved. And it's not just the work, because we may not even have exposure to that, but it's also involved in knowing what's in the curriculum. One last question, Katie, before we transition to the questions you have in the chat. Ms. Bracey, tell me this. We talked about the parents. Let's talk about the teachers. In your story, I see how you started in a place of creativity. You begin to connect with children, reach children, and find these unconventional ways of teaching, reaching, and educating kids, meeting them where they are. So much so you inspired them to be even more than many people believe. How about the teachers? How can they begin to relearn or reshape how they engage with these students? I'm just going to stop there. Where do you see an opportunity for teachers to pivot and maybe relearn this approach at creativity as compared to only teaching to the test?
Well, when I was teaching where I met Rudy, we had team teaching. And although people may not like your learning style, when you worked in teams, you used your skills to negotiate with your teammates what it was you want to do and how to do it. And there were some teachers who had better skills in some areas than others. So you divide up the subject matter so they could work to their skills. But the other thing is, the first time I was really successful, I worked by myself. I didn't involve anybody else. But CAMA taught me to invite the rest of the teachers. I did Kids Network, which was an ecological environmental program. I did it first by myself. And then she said, you can't do it by yourself. Invite other teachers to do what you're doing. And actually, one teacher did it better than I did. And I love that. You give them a chance to try. But I was single, and a lot of the teachers were parents. So they didn't have the time to invest. So CAMA made me the person to be the go-to person for them. And we worked as teams, even if we weren't teams, in subject matter area. Like in one school, there was a teacher who only wanted to teach science, and she didn't want anybody else to teach it. I closed the door and taught the hell out of science, okay? So when she got my kids, she had to think of something else to do. And so I broke that. Sometimes you just have to push, because people get in a role of, I'm only going to do this much. And they don't understand how valued they are to the community. So I start with things like, bring in your favorite dish and let's make a cookbook for the whole class. And people say, well, what's that got to do with teaching? It has, you're making community, okay? And then the next thing, this was the hardest one. We did a colonial farm. I've never been so tired in my life. We made dresses and marbles and wreaths and stuff, but the parents were involved. And they learned what it's like to teach kids. And the teachers learned what parents wanted. And so that helped a lot. I haven't answered your question exactly. Some teachers, my dad used to say, have laminated lesson plans and they're never going to change. But there are some teachers who can be inspired if you're willing to reach out and help them be a part of the team and feel valued.
Well, thank you for that. I definitely took three things away from what you said. The laminate lesson plan is definitely funny. I'm going to use that one. But I like what you said about embracing creativity again. I like what you said about partnership or pairing teachers, where teachers can work together. In addition, I also like what you said about community. So I can definitely see an opportunity to embrace community, embrace creativity, and stay away from the laminated lesson plan. So thank you, Miss Bonnie Bracey, for speaking with us tonight on these questions. Hold tight. We're going to do some discussion, and we're just going to do open discussion. And Katie is going to walk us through some questions that she has coming from the chat. Katie, what you got?
Have a question coming from Miss Arva, and I will let Arva ask the question.
Okay, Arva.
Thanks, Katie. Hello, Mrs. Sutton. Thank you so much for, all that you said today. It was very interesting and eye-opening. So my question for you is, what are your thoughts on the pressures that kids are facing today in high school? So, and I'm looking at it from the perspective of some of the things that my kids are doing now in the 11th grade are things that I did my first and second year in college. Mm-hmm. So, they're up super late doing homework all the time. It's just, to me, it looks like pressure, pressure, pressure. And I see very little room for creativity unless they have an arts class like, music or band or, something that's outside of the regular, band is not outside of the regular curriculum, but, it's not like, oh, you must be on this page by this day. What are your thoughts on?
Well, the problem is the body of knowledge has increased and the media involvement has increased. And so my plan for Alexandria is to do after school projects in the recreation center. They aren't just going to tie knots and play baseball and stickball. We have gardens. We have a place where kids are supervised and people help them to learn the software. We do field trips, and the museums have so much stuff. A teacher can't do it. It's the body of knowledge is out there now. There are some kids who can handle it, but there are a lot of kids who can't. And so there need to be in the community some places which are a refuge, like an after-school center, and people are funding them. Some of the tech companies are, or like the Smithsonian does outreach. We just got 10 computers in our after-school place where we use the program and someone comes and monitors what the kids are doing. It's too hard. It's hard for teachers. If you have a really smart kid in your classroom and you're not paying attention, in about 3 days, the kid will look at you and say, well, you're stupid. And they don't have any respect. No, I'm serious. They have no respect for you. So what you have to do is to first find out who this kid is that you're teaching. What the kids have to do is to understand that there are many sources of education, and that person standing in front of them is not the fount of knowledge for everything, and find the way that they best learn. And that's hard for people to do. Parents, it's really hard because even in your family, the children are different, the different way in which they learn. My brother learned from museums. I spent so much time in the museums, I became a museum educator and went to Russia to teach them how to do it. But my sister didn't do anything in the museum. My sister couldn't read really well. And my mother, she didn't glue her to the seat, but there was a time between 5 and 6 o'clock that we all sat down at the table, and whatever it was they had to learn, my mother helped, or somebody helped, or we found someone who would help. And that girl did better than me. She went to the Federal Trade Commission and changed their policies. She became a lawyer from learning how to, nail down whatever it was she was trying to pursue. Each child is different. That's the problem. People think that kids come to school, oh, this is a 5th grade kid, no such thing. Oh, this is a 12th grade, no such thing. We have forgotten that there's a variety of abilities that kids have, and most people don't know how to find out and assess what they are. Museums do a lot in helping. Libraries now are beginning to pick up. Like in the DC library, you can go in and learn how to finesse the software. There are not a lot of people in schools that have time to teach how to use Word, there's so much technology, it changes as you know it. Even if you think you know it today, tomorrow they'll come up with something else. So you have to find the places that will feed that knowledge, and people who will not be, people who will be sharing in their teaching or outreach. I guess people who are good at outreach, who enjoy what they're doing, and that's hard.
What are your thoughts on Montessori?
Oh, I wanted to be Montessori. In fact, I was asked to be a Montessori. In fact, in Arlington at Drew Model School, we had Montessori classes, and the kids were so great. They would come and they would put stuff away. Like I said, those Cuisinart rods. Kids who had never been taught how to manage things would leave the things all over the place. I taught hands-on science. The problem with hands-on science is a lot of kids don't put stuff away. Montessori kids kept that skill even when I think we ran out of Montessori teaching at 2nd grade, but they maintained those skills because they learned them early and they kept the idea. I loved it, and I wanted to be a Montessori teacher, but they didn't pay enough money.
And my niece and nephew went to Montessori up through 8th grade, I believe. And then in the 9th grade,
awesome.
They transferred to a regular public school. So it's been amazing sort of listening to them and watching them and seeing the types of things that they were doing in Montessori long before my kids were doing these types of things that
Absolutely.
they're doing in high school. So yeah, it's wow.
Yep. Well, see, if you're a gifted and talented teacher, you can learn what the Montessori teachers are doing and use the materials that they use. and steal the ideas from the museum and take the kids places. But if you're a regular school teacher, you kind of have your head stuck to the things that the principal mandates, which is why I got thrown out of a couple of schools.
Oh, thank you very much.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Arva.
Mm-hmm.
I think you got another question in the chat, Katie.
We've got a question from Dr. Rudy Jackson.
Oh, this is going to be interesting. Okay. Okay, Rudy, let's have it.
You're on mute.
I think I saw
Yes.
how would it change the teaching profession.
Yep.
I'm not sure.
Especially teacher education. If you could run a
Okay,
teacher education program at, let's say, Virginia State.
Listen, I belong to a group, I'm not going to name them. And I went every year and I would do presentations and the people would look at me and say, how did you learn this? And I'm thinking, you guys are the guys that teach teachers and you don't know how to do this or do that. And I couldn't understand it. And then I realized that in teacher education, people specialize in one area.
Right.
And I remember sitting watching a professor teach me about digitization from the Smithsonian that I learned 3 years before because I went to a field trip. And he was so excited. And he was from the University of Virginia. And I think I realized that most of them don't understand technology integration. That's the technology integration. Most of them don't understand K-12, and they look at us like we're a disease. There's not enough integration of K-12 teachers with higher ed. And basically, my feeling was that the higher ed teachers bowed to the subject, but not students. The other thing is that when we integrated, we lost leadership. So unfortunately, those people who happen to be of color or ethnicity and that kind of stuff didn't get to lead or recognize teachers who had skills. And so it becomes like a very boring thing of, this is my subject, this is how I teach it, and that's the only way. At the George Lucas Education Foundation, the people would come in and bring these ideas and pitch them, and he would look at those of us who were K-12 teachers and we'd say, well, that works okay, but there's got to be some integration. The teachers who teach teachers need to know how to work in the classroom. They need some classroom smarts, and I don't know how they get them if they don't ever work with kids. And I'm not talking about student teaching. I'm talking about technology integration and gifted and talented and special ed, and understand how to manage a schedule. Like the lady I told you, when the kids went out to PE and the kids went to this, they didn't understand because they don't go through it. They don't have enough experience with K through 6 to help kids make the jump from 6th grade to middle school, whatever that is. And then middle school is totally different. And for some reason, the people in higher ed are subject oriented. You learn geography. There's a program called Esri. If I was 20, I would jump on that thing like white on rice. It is geography, it is statistics, it is everything. And when you talk about, people say, oh, that looks hard. There are some subjects that bring data and information and geography and GIS and history together, and nobody's teaching them. You have to go to Esri to get it. It should be a part of every, even if you're not going to teach it, you should know that. The other thing is math. Math in the United States is abysmal. My husband's children went to school in Italy. The math and chemistry and physics that they learned was so much above. It wasn't just memorizing it. we need to get some new ways of teaching and involving people in higher ed with the kids who come to them and with the teachers who come to them. They're in a world of their own, and it doesn't work for me. Sorry.
Yeah, I would agree.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I got another question. Katie, you got a question? If not, second.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, oh my goodness, I just forgot my question. I know I was going to ask Cassie. She's on, and I know she's a teacher. Cassie, you have any questions for us? Well, I remember my question.
I see a couple in the chat also.
Okay, yeah, go ahead and do those while I remember what I was thinking about.
We've got one. How do today's teachers stick to required lessons but encourage exploration?
By teaming up with the groups of people who make those divisions, like National Geographic works with social studies. They can learn from the groups that are specialized what the techniques are. National Geographic has alliances. Social studies people have groups. I joined all the groups because my mother always said, you want to be the smartest person in the room. You want them to feel like that floor is going to fall out if you're not there because they don't know anything. And you have to go where the people know stuff. And unfortunately, the people in the groups, like the national teachers of math and the English people, they have it, but it isn't spread throughout the whole teaching community. And so you have to have people like Rudy and people who know things guide you to places where you can find people who can help you do things. Because there are a lot of people who graduate from MIT, they can't teach their way out of a paper bag. I'm sorry. Did you see the video about astronomy? I'm serious. You think I'm kidding? I'm not kidding.
Yeah. What I hear you saying is that collaboration is important among teachers, right? Collaboration and building partnerships with organizations out in the community, like you did with the Smithsonian, like you did at other museums and things like that. Is that correct?
Let me give you a better example. Mm-hmm. There's a place called the National Center for Supercomputing. When I would go there, they taught about the internet. We didn't even call it the internet. They did visualization and modeling. And I'm like, why do we care about this visualization and modeling? They taught us how to make our own weather maps. And when you go there, you feel like you're the genius of the world. But when you come back to your school, nobody knows what you're talking about. And right now, National Geographic is teaching lessons with their people in free lessons. And I know all of that stuff. Well, I know it because I took classes at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, and it was free. I mean, you just had to apply. It's the only conference I've ever went to where no man looked at me, no man talked to me. Those people were into their stuff. They were learning how to do these things. And in fact, I wanted to stay in the hall. They were doing things that I can't even explain to you, like where they simulate a roller coaster and you had to ride on it and do things. And I would say, why do you do this? And now some of their visualizations are out and they're wrapping them into art and music. And that's why they did them, because but there's not enough integration of teachers who get a chance to learn that stuff. They had a project called Bug Scope and Chick Scope. I could hatch chickens, tell them how it worked, what it looked like inside. I never lost but one or two chickens because they analyzed it. Mm-hmm. And most people just do stuff off the cuff. They don't get into the subject. National Center for Supercomputing, I actually should, if I had money, I would give them money, but I don't. So what I do is a bug scope. A kid say, oh, look, that's a roach. But you know what? If you learn what all these things are, then you begin to get an interest. Or environmental education. The first time I went in my high heels and I drove my Corvette. And that woman said to me, honey, put these boots on and put a bag over that coat and park that car up here, let's walk. And I'm like, what are you talking about? But you know what? I learned, so I can read a meadow, I can do a stream, I can do quadrats. Well, who gets to do that? There are all of these things that teachers don't get taught. And so now we're acting like environmental education just got invented. Nope.
You know, what I love about this story, Ms. Bonnie Bracey, is that Katie, she was never refined to the classroom. She was always intellectually curious. And the key thing that you said, Katie, you said partnerships, but I'll tell you what I hear. I hear she built relationships with people who had names and brands that were much larger than her school district and her principals. Right. George Lucas, museums, the military. She was always outside of the classroom, networking, building relationships, keeping her territory expanded. So when she got back to the classroom and they're like, why are you doing that? You're like, oh, I learned that at the National Institute of Science. Don't worry about that. That's just, what I do.
But doesn't that creativity permission? Go ahead. I'm sorry. I was just thinking, doesn't some go ahead.
Go ahead. You go.
Doesn't some of that creativity that you have, Ms. Bracey, doesn't it come from being taught by teachers that were creative, right? So you were brought up during a time. No. Okay, so that's something that was in you.
No, let me tell you where I went, so you understand. I went to Catholic school for 8 years.
Oh, okay, now.
Okay. and we memorized everything. They put me in the library and I learned about Egypt because I could read so fast that I made people crazy. But a lot of kids would be able to read fast if they didn't do that Dick and Jane stuff. And
sure.
I think the reason I became creative was because these people, if you go to the National Center for Supercomputing and you say, well, we're going to hatch eggs in the classroom. They said, well, don't you want to know what's in it? You said, what do you mean? They said, well, we can show the kids day by day what's happening and why it works and why you have to have moisture. And I'm like, what? Because when I was taught it by 4-H, you just put the eggs in there and you turn them. You didn't learn about why or what or anything. And they didn't tell you what to do with the chicks when they hatch. But when it's a body of knowledge that people, that's their specialty. They do it really well. We did in Catholic school, nope. They just skip you.
Get these teachers to be creative then, right? And I don't want to come down on teachers because I think they're
it's not their
creatures,
fault.
Right?
It's not their fault.
Right. But they're teaching to a test. Some of them are in districts that don't have a Smithsonian around the corner, right? So it's how do they learn to be creative when they're in a community where there isn't creativity? You did it in Germany, right? So how does that happen, right? How is it that we can support our teachers to find that creativity that still allows them to teach the children, to teach to the god-awful test, right? That so many of their jobs are reliant on.
The Smithsonian has outreach for every kind. It's the largest museum in the world. There are 18 museums. And one of the things to do is to find that outreach online. The other thing is to take those courses, because if you teach the kids correctly, they'll do it themselves. So if I did tessellations, and I don't know how to explain in 2 seconds what it is, but where you move things around. But there was a little boy named Robert Hall. I hope he won't mind my using his name. I was teaching him about geography and tessellations and stuff. And I noticed he was doing 2 games at one time. I said, what are you doing? He said, well, this game called Carmen Sandiego, you have to move around the United States. And this game over here, I'm transporting sheep to a place. If I put all the information together in both games, I can do my game better. But see, who's going to let the kid do that? Because the people don't know that you could do that. And then I had a kid, this woman said, I'm going to put this child in games with you, but he's going to be a troublemaker. You know what the trouble I had was? He didn't want to go home. So it's about putting the right materials in the right way. And I think somebody like Rudy and people who understand children could do a who is this kid? You got to find out who they are and then help the teachers find out how to engage. It's called the 7 E's. It help them engage, explore, be entertained, extend. I don't remember the other 3, but look up 7 E's. And I've got that from a physics teacher. And it works. Like there's a project called The Science of Cooking at the Exploratorium. Cooking is a science. It is. Mm-hmm. But who would ever say that it is? Because they don't talk about it. But that's what it is. And so if you say, well, how do you know when an egg is cooked? That really is science. But we don't talk about those kind of things. We think science is only when you're doing the bugs and talking about the climate. And actually it all comes together. It's not about being smart. It's about being involved. If you're in a country town like I was in Germany, you punt. So in that little town, there were jewelry makers and they carved little animals. Now I was too stupid to keep all of them, but I had little animals carved out of quartz and jade and all of those things. And they had caves. So they taught us mineralogy. There are assets somewhere. And like even in my family, did you know they are red, yellow, and orange watermelon? Mm-hmm. I didn't until I went to the farm. And I didn't know that when I jumped in the creek and there were frogs and stuff in there, I thought I was going to die. I couldn't believe that I was in there with frogs and all that stuff. Nobody taught that stuff. I mean, I had a white bathing suit. I was disgusted. But then that lady taught me. So it has to be that we are not giving the teachers who teach teachers enough resources so that they can make better teachers.
Sure. And
I love that story so much. I mean, how much is in there, right? How much is in there? I mean, that holistic learning everywhere, touching everything, being engaged in the classroom. Katie, I think, she answered your question and some more. It's so much there, I can't even digest it because there's so much there, right? But I'm just trying to envision her going from her hot rod Corvette, right? To
had to do it. Had to buy some more computers. And in fact, some of the first pioneer teachers actually we would buy like sets of computers. I know one lady that had 8, and something happened, and I think there's a fire in the school, and that's when she told her husband, I bought those computers, and I love the car, but man, that computer can take you everywhere. Look, I went to Egypt, and when I got to Egypt, the only reason I'm not an archaeologist is because I get claustrophobia, but I was ready to do something. When I went to Greece, I taught in Greece, I knew so much stuff in the museum, they would let me in free. And I got that from the computer, from just looking at what people offered. So we must have a way to let kids explore their interests and use the knowledge that people have already accumulated. Like you can do archaeology on a computer, but school systems may make very narrow choices.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's another question in the chat. Do you want to read that one, Katie?
A couple, actually.
Okay.
Angie D asked, do you have any thoughts on how Black educators can begin to supplement for the things that racists are taking out of the curriculum? And honestly, I'm going to expound on her question a little bit, because I don't think it's just Black educators, but how can Black people, in addition to educators, supplement for things that are being taken out?
You fell into my trap. So digitalization, like we're doing with the African American Hall of Fame. First of all, I used to not want to study Black history because I didn't want them to tell me about slaves, because I didn't want them to tell me that my great-grandfather was a slave, because the pictures that they showed were so horrible. Mm-hmm. And then in my neighborhood, the African American Hall of Fame, they went back and showed me that there were no school buses, there was no money, and that the community came together like the community came together for me. So when it came time for me to go to Russia, I knew it was okay because I knew someone who had been. So you need to know that knowledge about and some of it we're just learning. I've learned so much Black history this year. I think I want to say, okay, enough. But it has to be integrated because otherwise you get angry. You get like this. I watched them dig up a church and to move the bodies from across where I live. And I said, how can they do that? And in fact, my family got moved because they said Route 66 was going through. It didn't. You just have to have a different level of awareness. And you have to use the national museums. You have to read the books. You have to do the internet, but you need to digitalize what happened in your own community. In my community, there was a sit-in before anybody sat in for hot dogs, okay? It was for books. You don't see that anywhere. I was in Florida when they talked about some people that got blown up at Christmas, but the NAACP didn't want to talk about that. We have hidden history, and we have to teach each other and ourselves so we have a respect. I had a picture of a man who was being burned for learning how to read, and I kept that in my class, in my room when I taught, when I was learning. When it got hard, I would look at that man that was burned up for learning how to read and think, what a joy it would have been for him if he could have learned. So you have to find something that inspires you from history to do it. That's not a good answer, but
I think it is a good answer.
The digitalization will show you that all Black people aren't stupid, that slaves were smart and they did a lot of things. They don't, all I heard when I was coming up was about people being in slavery with chains and stupid stuff. And it made me feel bad. So I didn't really want to do Black history. Sure. And now it's different. You learn about, you learn a lot. Right. And it's available on the internet.
Right. Hold that second question, Katie. Miss Bonnie Bracey, can you tell us about your current project in Alexandria? I know you guys are doing a restoration project, right? Can you tell us about that and the digitalization there?
Actually, it's not me. It's a guy, Dawkins. He is the memory of Alexandria. And what he does and what he has done is to take pictures of, write the story of the first, you probably know that Earl Lloyd was the first NBA player, but you probably don't know that his family were coal tenders and that when they played basketball, they used the back of a truck and used their equipment bag to keep from falling off the truck to go to the other games, and that the teachers got together and supported and drove them to the places. And then when he went to West Virginia, the various teachers would go and see his game and they encouraged him to apply. We do a lot of things that people don't know about. And when he became famous, he reached back and see, guys have a ideational scaffolding. Sports is something you can use to integrate. Girls, we haven't got that yet. Well, maybe they do, but I never played girl sports, so I don't know. But you can make leadership with men using sports. And my brother wants us to do that with medicine. It's not working right now, but at least sports gets them started. We need to do something that bridges the gap in science. Mm-hmm. I didn't answer the question well, but what Dawkins is doing is there's gentrification. The house that I lived in when I grew up is now worth almost $1 million. Well, who the hell is going to buy in that place? And who's going to remember that Black people live there? Well, in Alexandria, people are going to remember because you can go to that website and it tells you who the people were, who Mr. Patterson was, who went to Russia, and that people sang in different countries, and that the people who were in the Ruth Youth even one thing that women can talk about, there were no Black women in fashion magazines, and all the stuff that they made was made by us, homemade. Well, there was a girl, LeJune Huntley, who went to Cannes Film Festival, and the people in Europe thought she was beautiful, so she came back. And the industry, beverage industry, pushed her forward. And that's when we started to integrate and be a part of the talk about women in magazines and makeup and cooking, except and not slaves in a box like Aunt Jemima, okay? And I forgot what the guy's Uncle Ben. Slaves in a box. Mm-mm. We needed to break out of that. And there's still people who say, oh, but you know, when you see Gone with the Wind, hey, you know what? That woman was really smart. She had to dumb down to take that role. So
That's
some
right.
kids who are insecure think that we're stupid, and we're not. We are we've been kings and queens. We did metallurgy before many countries did in some countries. But kids don't know that because it's not taught.
You know,
Thank you.
there's something that somebody who is a teacher who has joined us has said, and it's Cassandra Davis, and I'm going to read what it is that she said. It's teaching is facilitating learning, not showing yourself as the only access to information pathway. And I think that's a great quote, actually.
Absolutely. Well, in fact, I'm embarrassed, but I'm going to tell you, I'm learning Vietnamese cooking from V. Bui, who was in my 6th grade class at Long Branch. Nathan Lyon taught me how to shop farmers markets. I have several teacher kids who are in different occupations who are now teaching me online about what they know and how they do things. And it's interesting to be able to do that. Like Rudy, he taught me to make sure when I'm thinking about kids going to Harvard, he doesn't know this, but anyway, to not go past the leadership in the community, because people who are of color and people who are of your community may know a path that will help you get there better. Mm-hmm. And you won't be there by yourself, and you'll have some support, and you'll know the kind of things that could happen, and you'll be strong when you go there. A lot of kids get those scholarships and fall out. They can't do it by themselves.
That's right.
Sorry, Rudy, I had to say that.
No, it's true. I mean, community is one of the biggest things. And I think if we learn one big thing here, it's that we still have to depend on our community and on others in order for our children to get ahead and in order for our teachers to feel supported. Nobody's in this alone.
That's true.
Awesome. Let me share with you all some ideas to wrap us up. And Tamika, if you don't mind putting in the chat the links to Miss Bonnie Bracey-Sutton, the work that she's currently doing, in addition to her Facebook group. So if anybody wanted to catch up, she is still sharing today and passing that knowledge on to other people. So what's the name of that? Because I didn't send it to Tamika. Miss Bonnie Bracey, what's the name of your Facebook group again?
The Digital Equity Group in Facebook.
Digital Equity Group in Facebook. Tamika will find that link. Let me summarize. So in tonight's Go, I chatted with Miss Bonnie Bracey-Sutton, and I said, well, what would we like to walk away with after tonight? She says, I really want the audience to understand more so a history of education in America. In addition, in the age of technology, teaching needs to evolve. Teachers need to evolve. Parents need to understand the possibilities. In a reference in math and science, we have to push so we can begin to enable ourselves in other opportunities. Lastly, for the teachers and educators out there, from her life, her story, her career, as an accomplished teacher with many ideas and experience, she can work in any industry based on her education and experiences. You see, she's not just somebody you can put in a classroom and say, go do that. She had so many experiences outside of the classroom. So thank you, Miss Bonnie Bracey-Sutton, for being here tonight, for sharing with us your story, your history, so that we can begin to learn from these, be better educators, parents, teachers, and community leaders.
Thank you for joining us at Southern Soul Livestream Talk Show. Join us weekly at soullivestream.com. If you're joining us live, we'll take a quick music break and then come back for a discussion with the audience.